The agenda this week talked transit with the heads of Metrolinx and the Toronto Transit Commission, examined how to secure a workforce to build Ontario's much-needed infrastructure improvements, and looked into Ontario's system for helping injured workers. The agenda's week in review begins with balancing policing with privacy in a digital age. What's your concern about giving the deputy chief, who seems like a very fine fella, additional powers in order to help him do his job better?
Well, I think that we don't start from the standpoint that the police are necessarily out to grab as much information as they can, but we do very much study history, and we know that when powers have been given to people, even a well-meaning and earnest police officer may go beyond what is legitimate. The other thing that we're concerned about, so that in other words, they may grab more information than's actually needed, and they may also have access to very personal identifying information on the habits, on the sites that are visited, et cetera, of innocent law-abiding Canadians. And that really concerns us, because once you start going down that path, you're really going down a path of altering what is otherwise a free and democratic society. Any time that a state feels that it has to know all the time everything that's going on, you no longer have a free and democratic society. We only need to think to the Cold War, or even to other countries in the world right now where there's that all the time surveillance. So we don't want to be treated like suspects.
Okay, Robert, what about, well, everybody's concerned about terrorism, right? What if the chief thinks he's got a tip on a potential terrorist activity that may happen somewhere in Northern Ontario, and he needs additional powers in order to root out the potential suspect? Who doesn't want to give him that additional power?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. We looked at 10 cases. We negotiated access to 10 cases. Many of them were, in fact, terrorist national security cases where the police alleged that they hit a roadblock, effectively a digital roadblock, where they were unable to pursue perpetrators of alleged crimes because of encryption or because they couldn't get access to vital digital information. It had been purged, perhaps, in some cases by ISPs. And so we spent I've been working on this for 2 years. I have come to believe that this is not a fiction that the police are making up. I have come to believe, through sitting in countless meetings and looking at countless documents, that this is real.
They have a case.
They have a case. I do believe that. Okay. I think there are cases that we've looked at very carefully. Some of them are terrifying cases, child abuse cases where there's evidence sitting on phones that they can't get access to. So I really do think that there has to be some thoughtful consideration to these concerns. There's no question about it. And at the same time, I'm straddling here because I'm a journalist and I have grave concerns about the kinds of abuses of power that we're actually sort of seeing. And it happened recently in Quebec. So the question is, so what do we do about that? And where's that middle ground? And I think that's what we haven't figured out yet. We're not even close to having figured that out because we haven't had the public debate. And what's really interesting is, here we are in the process of public consultations. Like, we're moving very quickly towards some sort of legislative reform, and I just don't think we're ready.
Do you have any difficulty giving the police this additional power that they want in order to root out child abusers and potential terrorists and that kind of thing?
Yes.
You do?
Not because I don't think those people should be stopped, because they should. Some of the proposals are not privacy issues. They are, but that's the secondary consequence. The primary consequence is security. This is a security versus insecurity discussion. To use the example of encryption. So to provide police access to encrypted devices, there's several ways that you can go down that road. One of them would be compelling individuals to disclose their passwords or decryption keys or something like that. And Sukanya might be able to talk to the legal issues about self-incrimination, which actually the RCMP commissioners also said is probably a no-go. So what's the other major way that you could go through that? Well, you could set up backdoors or kiosks or ways that technology companies would have to design their security systems to have a way for police to gain access into it. Sadly, cryptographers and security engineers are having a devil of a time right now trying to maintain security where they aren't building backdoors in. And we know when backdoors have been built into security, so this has been done by the Canadian government in the past, and it's happened in other instances, hackers get through it very quickly. And that's isolated sorts of situations. When we talk about enabling access to huge volumes of communication with thousands or tens of thousands or millions of persons' communications, it starts to unravel the past decade's worth of security. And while yes, it might mean that we can catch certain serious criminals, which would be a good thing for society. It would also render society more broadly vulnerable to equal attacks from other state actors, from criminals, from the very people we're trying to protect ourselves against.
The first thing is that most people who are injured on the job recover and go back to their normal jobs. So they're not the ones who are the most vulnerable. They're not the workers who are suffering the permanent
You
injuries.
don't quibble with his 92%.
We do quibble with the 92% as well, because we have tried time and again to get a straight answer about whether the WSIB is tracking actual return to work or is tracking whether they enter in their computers, person can return to work, no more loss of earnings. And we have been unable to get a straight answer, and we'd like that answer. We'd like to know what the board is doing. We know, for example, that in the case of workers who are permanently injured and then put through retraining and told they can work, that the board takes no efforts to actually track whether they are back at work. All they track is the fact that they completed the training program and the board said they could find a job.
Okay, hold on there. Is that accurate?
Not accurate. And Meredith knows, in fact, she was in my office with a group of injured workers 3 or 4 weeks ago or a month ago, because I make it a habit of meeting with workers from, workers that Meredith represents, workers that David represents. I've gone to their clinics. It's a true number. It tracks the number of people who are actually back with their employer or with an employer within 12 months working.
So it's not just that you've closed the books on them.
It's not just that we've closed the books.
I
know they're back at work. I know they're back at work. So what I want to turn this conversation to is, what are we going to do about the other 8%? Because I agree, there's 8% is a lot of workers who aren't achieving the success that we want them to achieve, and that's our responsibility too, no question about that. And Miguel, without getting into the details of his case, there are challenges in some of the toughest cases, and that's what our programs are focused on trying to do, is how do we help those workers achieve the same success that we're achieving otherwise? Does the WSIB ignore doctors? And I think the answer to that is no. In fact, when that report was raised, and it was raised by David through the OFL, and we took that very seriously, because something like that suggests there's not integrity in the system. And I have said since I became president, we have to have a system that is known for its integrity. We investigated it internally. We had an internal audit. The outcome of it was that in 85% of the cases where we use medical consultants to assist our case managers in making a decision, and we have to do that. Our case managers are not medical experts. So I think people would understand we need to get some medical advice. 85% of the time, our medical consultants agree with the family physician. So there's a small percentage of times when they don't. And it's why I said to you, I'd like to see the cases that David put forward that might fit into that small category, because maybe we can do something about them. Okay. What I will say is, we use the advice of external medical consultants in less than 3% of our cases. So, first of all, it's not a widespread practice, as is suggested, that we are using medical consultants to assist us. In less than 3% of all of our cases in a year do we even use them. So that's the reality of where we are.
Gary, you wanted to follow up.
Well, on that I'm going to follow up, and that is, the use of consultants is a double-edged sword, because, if only 3% of the cases are being referred out for opinions, the reality that reflects is that much of the time, and statistically I guess it's 97% of the time, the frontline decision makers are making decisions that are negative without any supportive medical opinion to support that negative position. And there will be, usually on the file, reports from a family doctor. I see this all the time. Or specialists saying, this person can't work, whatever. And then the case manager will look at that and say, well, it's not objective evidence. There's no finding. So the doctor's opinion counts for nothing. And they don't refer it out for an independent assessment because, again, 97% of the time that doesn't get done. So, the consultant problem is a problem in the medical evidence front, but it's only one of the problems.
He says 3% of the cases.
Yeah, well, what about the other 97%, right? It's not like you have to refer a case out every time to a consultant.
I'm surprised I'm hearing that you would like us to use medical consultants more, because the criticism to this point has been you use them too much. You should rely on the evidence of the family physician.
It's a nuanced
and that's quite frankly, in 97% of the time,
hang on,
that's exactly what we do.
It's a nuanced criticism. And part of the criticism is if you're not going to have any regard for medical evidence at all, at least that's a pretty significant point. And so, yeah, there's one issue of consultant shopping and trying to influence the opinions. That's a problem. But as far as I'm concerned, the more systemic problem is the complete disregard for medical evidence across the board. And in fact, even in the board's own study, sometimes the board doesn't even respect its own consultants' opinions, and I can understand why they might not. But it's just like the Wild West when it comes to medical evidence at the board.
Should we get to this Auditor General's report right off the top here? Here's what Bonnie Lysyk said in her report just released not too long ago. She said, Metrolinx rarely takes action against contractors who deliver projects late, resulting in higher costs. She said it takes little action when consultants submit designs that aren't feasible, contain errors, or improperly estimate required materials, and fixing these errors results in higher costs. It took longer than the 2-month industry standard for contractors to fix construction deficiencies in 3/4 of reviewed Metrolinx projects. She said Metrolinx doesn't do sufficient work to ensure payments to CN and Canadian Pacific Rail are correct and reasonable. And she says Metrolinx pays CN and CP markups as much as 74% higher than industry standards for parts and labor. So that's what the AG says. What do you say in terms of what you're doing to address these issues?
Well, that's a lot of information there, Steve. But first of all, I would say that we, of course, welcome the input and the advice from the Auditor General. We will be developing an action plan that we'll be taking to our board, and ultimately it will form the basis of a report back to the Auditor General in terms of progress against her recommendations. We do actually hold our contractors and consultants to account. So, for example, there is one contractor over the past 5 years that we have disqualified 5 times, even when they're the low bid. So we do take a look at past performance, and we do apply references in how we award work in the future. So we have changed our processes. We instituted a new vendor performance management system in January of 2015 that really takes all the data from how a contractor or consultant is working on a job, and then we use that information to determine whether we should award future work to that contractor. There are ways we can improve, no question about that. We've started that process, we'll continue that process.
You say all that, and I have no reason to dispute what you say, but then the auditor says in 2009, Metrolinx filed a letter of default to a contractor who hadn't been on a work site in weeks, and since then the same contractor has been given 22 more contracts worth $90 million. How does that happen?
Well, I think in that particular case, the contractor was slow in mobilizing. So we issued a letter of default again in 2009. They came and started the project within 2 weeks, and they finished that project satisfactory ultimately. Those 22 projects, the vast majority of them were done satisfactory. It's not as if that contractor underperformed in every contract. We do need to make sure that we're getting value for money. The contractors are delivering what they're supposed to be delivering. And of course, there's always room for improvement. We will take the advice of the Auditor General and apply it as best we can.
You do know this is the stuff that drives people crazy and undercuts public confidence in everything, right?
Well, absolutely. We need to demonstrate to our publics that the value that we're getting through the money that the taxpayer money we're investing is money being well spent and it's delivering quality projects on time. I like to say that across the 275 projects that Metrolinx delivered over the past 5 years, we came in on budget at 3.8% overage. So we actually think—
Sorry, what does that mean?
On average, 3.8% above budget. We think when you look around Canada at major infrastructure deliverers, that's a pretty good result. Of course, that's an average, and that there are projects that will be on the right-hand side of the equation, and there are projects on the left-hand side of the equation. About half of our projects, more than half of our projects, come in at or below budget.
Have you had any second thoughts about awarding contracts to the lowest bidder?
We actually don't do that very much anymore. Typically what we do now, and this has been a change over the last few years, is of course bid price is an important component of what we look at, but we also look at the quality of the bid as well as the references and the experience with that particular contractor. So again, the reason we've implemented a vendor performance management system is so that we can track how they perform over time and where they have issues that we can take constructive action to either have them address those issues, or ultimately, as we've done in the past, we will disqualify contractors from their bid.
I wonder if part of this, though, is that in some respects, Metrolinx finds itself between a rock and a hard place, in as much as you are doing really high-end work for which I presume there aren't a lot of people out there who actually do this work. Do they have you in some respects over a barrel because they know you have few options when it comes to letting contracts out?
Well, there are some parts of our work that's very specialty oriented. So track work, switch work, signalization. There are only a few companies globally, let alone locally, who do this kind of work. So in some niche areas, there is very little competition or very few choices. But in other areas, in civil infrastructure, in other areas of more standard work, construction work, there are lots of contractors out there. We're trying to invite as many different companies to come to our bid proposals because we think more competition is better. It will drive quality, it will drive price, and we'll get a better outcome in the end. So we're trying to get more and more people involved and interested.
I don't mean this to sound as much of a smart aleck question as it may sound. So with that setup, I want to get a better understanding of what you actually do, because the report says that Metrolinx contracts out its design, its construction work. The auditor questioned Metrolinx oversight ability. If you're not designing, if you're not building, and not properly overseeing, what are you actually doing?
Well, I think what we are doing is, first of all, we're setting the plan. What is it that we are going to build, where we're going to build it, how we're going to build it. We will contract with a consultant to actually do the engineering design for that project, and that's pretty standard. I think most public sector infrastructure organizations, they go to the consulting industry to design projects. We oversee that design, and if we are doing it through a traditional bid, build, construct process, we would then put out the contract to a constructor to build, and then either ourselves or a third party will oversee that constructor. And then ultimately, we commission it, and then we put it into service. So our role is setting what is the expectations at the outset in terms of the project, to go through the procurement process, to evaluate the consultant or the contractor's performance, and to make sure we're getting the product in the end that we contracted to get at the beginning.
What percentage of your operating revenue comes from the fare box itself?
70%, which is almost unheard of. Now, you may know, Steve, that I previously used to work in Sydney in Australia, and interestingly, that was the exact inverse of what we have here. Here, TTC covers 70% of its operating costs through the fare box, and the remaining 30% is made up through subsidy. In Railcorp, where I previously worked in Sydney, it was the exact opposite, 70% subsidy. Most US transit systems and most Canadian transit systems receive subsidy of around $1.50, $2, even $2.50 per rider. The much maligned TTC has to make do with 90 cents per rider. So I would argue that for the money the TTC receives, it works miracles in providing service 24/7 every day.
I was telling you before we went on, I used to cover the TTC. It was part of my beat. We're going more than 30 years ago. And the fact is, it was like that back then too. For some reason, senior levels of government have never wanted to subsidize the TTC's operations more, despite the fact that others around the world have done so. Why do you think that is?
I mean, at the end of the day, transit is an expensive business, not least because it's very labor intensive. You know, you need to have lots of vehicles, and the infrastructure to support transit is inherently expensive. Track, signals, vehicles, cables, drainage, pumps, it all adds up, and it constantly needs to be maintained to keep it in a state of good repair. So I guess in a world where there's lots of other pressures, Toronto community housing, emergency services, transit is just in the pecking order. What I would say is that transit is the lifeblood of this city, and you know, the TTC keeps Toronto moving, and if Toronto is successful, Ontario is successful, Canada's successful. So to me, it's a complete no-brainer. We must invest more in the TTC.
But when people spend more, they expect more.
They do.
Are they going to get more for what they're spending?
Well, I would argue they already are. In my tenure at the TTC for the last 5 years, the reason I wanted to come here was I wanted to be part of the team that turns around the TTC. Good system, you know, basically a good system, but it somewhat lost its way. It was somewhat stuck in the 1970s, I think most people would say. It needed a top-to-bottom modernization, and that's what we're working on. Infrastructure, processes, and the prevailing culture. So what are we doing? We're renewing the whole streetcar fleet, 204 brand new state-of-the-art low-floor, fully accessible air-conditioned streetcars. We're extending the subway up to York Region. You wait till you see it. It is spectacular. It'll open at the end of next year. We're replacing the signalling system on Line 1, not with light for light, but with a new signalling system that will enable us to run more trains safely closer together. We're rolling out Presto, a new way to pay, which gets rid of, finally, tokens, tickets, transit, transfers passes.
Taken longer, though, than you hoped.
Longer than we hope, but it will be at the end of this year. Every vehicle and every station will have at least one entrance covered. So it's getting there. It's on the horizon. And in the meantime, huge amounts of work being done on culture change and on upgrading the basic infrastructure of the TTC, including next year. We just got approval to buy 280 new buses. So lots happening for your money.
Fair enough, but we get 6 inches of snow on the ground in the capital city, and somehow the TTC, I don't want to say falls apart, but you know what happens. Why are we so vulnerable still to all of that?
Because for basically 2 decades, 20 years, the TTC was basically left untouched. So we're now reaping the disbenefit of that. So it falls to my team and I to fix decades of underinvestment. So, I mean, that, at the end of the day, that shouldn't have happened this morning. And generally, the TTC is pretty good at coping with adverse weather. It appears that was an old cable that was somewhat compromised, passed a visual inspection, but salty water from thawing snow got into that cable.
Okay, but the bigger question is, why are we so far behind?
Why are we so far behind? Quite simply because we left it under-invested and basically not modernized for 20 years. So we're now playing catch-up. So it falls to my team and I to take the difficult decisions, the unpopular decisions, the tough decisions that people don't like. They don't like being on shuttle buses when we close the subway, plan closures practically every weekend. Why are we doing it? I know it's not popular because it's the right thing to do. Every night we get about 2.5 hours time to maintain the system. That's not enough to replace track and to replace signalling systems. So I think, unpopular though it is, when in 5 years' time this system has been completely modernized, people will look back and say, we might not have liked it at the time, but Byford & Co. did the right thing.
No, I hear you. And in fact, I mean, you have put much more of an accent on customer satisfaction than any of your predecessors that I can recall, and you've got kudos for doing that. Having said that, after, I think, some uptick in customer satisfaction, it went down 10% between the second and third quarters.
For a specific reason.
Go ahead, tell me.
So it's a specific reason. So I'm disappointed by that. I wasn't surprised by that, but we predicted that would happen. It was all completely related, almost certainly related, completely related to the problems we had with air conditioning on line 2, Bloor-Danforth, over last summer. So a particularly hot summer, something like 35 heat alert days in a row, very humid weather, overwhelmed the now 20-year-old's air conditioning system on, not all, around 20% of the cars on line 2. So understandably, our customers weren't too happy about being rammed into hot carriages. So it was only about 20% of the carriages that the aircon wasn't working. But I guess what it would say is it proves the case that customer satisfaction statistics and surveys are in fact valid. Had that figure not gone down, I think our critics would have been saying, there you go, these are made up statistics. We'll get that figure back.
I do remember a former community college president talking about living in a province where we have jobs without people and people without jobs. So the question is, maybe 150,000 new jobs to build all of this infrastructure and deal with all of this. Do we have the people in this province who can do all of that work?
Today, we do not. We have youth and newcomers who are not employed who we'd like to stream into these careers. So that's why over the summer we spent time with the construction sector and some researchers and mapped out against the top 50 construction jobs what those jobs are and how you access them. The important thing about these jobs, they represent the bulk of those 147,000 jobs. All of them are paying double the minimum wage, and most of them, I'd say 80% of them, require some kind of post-secondary training and skills development. So they're higher order jobs for sure.
This I don't get then. If we know the jobs are going to be there, we know they're going to be there. So anybody who is in high school right now knows, this is out there. Then why would these jobs go vacant?
Well, it's a good question, Steve. And here's the thing. We had a transportation summit a year ago in October. And the focus of the summit was, we've got the funding, now what? And the now what was the labor unions and the engineering firms saying, we don't have enough skilled people to work to go into these jobs that are going to be created. And they were saying, we want to go in and talk to grade 9 students to educate them about where these jobs are. So on Take a Kid to Work Day, my son, who is in grade 9, we brought him in to read our talent study. And then he had to go in and present to our policy committee, who wrote that report, on his ideas as a grade 9 student, how you educate grade 9 students about these jobs. So other than developing a video game, he had a bunch of other great ideas, but a lot of it was about creating a platform like LinkedIn where students could learn about where those jobs are. We also know that parents as well may think that some of these jobs don't pay that well, where that's not the case. Well, we'll always need doctors and lawyers. The fact is that the trades pay extremely well, as do a lot of the engineering or professional services jobs. So a lot of it is about communication and education.
I don't know how much of it is, I'm not sure Johnny or Janie's going to make enough money if they do this job, and more about there's just something cooler about telling your friends that your kid's going to be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or, you know, an engineer or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, and let me tell you, my sister has 2 boys. Now let me talk to you about their journey in high school. Her one son decided he wanted to be an electrician. She got called in by his guidance counselor 3 times saying, your son is too smart to be an electrician. He should be an electrical engineer. To which her son said, but I tried an experience week with an electrical engineering firm and another with an electrician. I like to work with my hands. So she let him do the electrician path. But there is some bias in the system where you assume folks are too smart to go one way or the other. The other son decided—
Just hang on a sec. That's not a parent. That's
No,
a guidance counselor
that's right.
in a school.
That's right.
Giving bad guidance.
Well, it's interesting because the trades at this panel discussion that said we didn't have enough skills to fulfill all these jobs, they said since we dropped shop in high school, there's fewer kids going into the trades. Then those that are going into the trades, only about 40% are able to complete because our apprenticeship model is quite restricted in terms of the number of apprentices that can go through with the journeyman to get trained up. So there's a lot. Our report has 18, believe it or not, 18 different recommendations. 6 that are going against parents and the schools in terms of educating and informing them and the students. A whole series of recommendations around the post-secondary educational institutions. How do we scale up and make them aware of where the demand is going to be? And another set against the policymakers, which is looking at the apprenticeship ratios, looking at cross-border talent mobility. You know, Alberta is potentially coming back on stream now, but since 2014, about 40,000 jobs were lost in energy and the construction sector. Those were people that could have been moving into Ontario to take up some of these jobs, but there are some mobility borders around how we recognize their skills and certification.
Now, I interrupted you when you were in the midst of telling us about the second kid. What happened with that? With the other, this is your nephew, right?
The nephew decided to become a teacher, and we graduate 9,000 teachers a year in the province of Ontario.
For 5,000 jobs.
So he's teaching in the UK right now. So we're really hoping he falls in love with an Ontario girl and moves back. There we go.
That is as good an example as exists today of the mismatch between the kinds of graduates we're putting out in post-secondary, and there are not those jobs for those kinds of graduates. We got to turn that around somehow.
Well, we have to turn around, but it starts with us, and that's why it was so important that we as a Board of Trade worked with our members, because unless the employers are able to define where the demand is going to be, it's very difficult for people to access that information. So while we did this study against this infrastructure investment that the feds and the province and the cities and the municipalities in the region are making, we do want to lift this study against other sectors that are part of the Board of Trade so that over time, our ambition is to have a much more robust labor market outlook so that students can be better informed about where the opportunities are.
And that is the Agendas Week in Review. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety on our website, tvo.org, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.